Is it his first film?
It's not Stephen's first film. Stephen produced Amanda Knox, which was a really large Netflix hit back around last year.
A great film.
Yeah, Emmy-nominated film, a very incredible film. Stephen and I were at Oxford at the same time. He was doing his MBA, and I was doing my undergrad. But we didn't meet. We graduated at the same time. We didn't meet then. I came to New York straight after Oxford last June to work with Didector, the rapper, for a few months, and then decided it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. I was making bigger, more important content, and so I went back and floundered a little while. Wasn't really sure what I was doing, and then met Maria, who runs Observatory with Stephen. And suddenly, sort of one thing moved to another. I got this email from Stephen that afternoon after meeting her saying, "I'm so excited to work with you. This," and he'd never even seen anything I'd done. And somehow, 2 weeks later, we were boarding a plane to Holland with a potential meeting with Geert Wilders' press secretary. But I think it was that commitment to the idea of doing it, which is why it worked. I think if we'd sat at home emailing back and forth trying to make it happen from there, it never would have gone down. But we went out there and committed, and a week before we were shooting interviews with other people, just making sure that whatever happened, we could make some sort of project out of it.
So you really dove into it very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of Stephen's way, and I have to thank him big time, because he's the real driving force behind making this happen. Self-funding it up front, and then obviously Vice came in after a while and gave us a big leg up. But in a way, we knew we had one meeting with Wilders, about a 10-minute meeting. He never does more than 10, 20-minute meetings with anybody, pretty much. And somehow there was something clicked. I think it was mostly because we were independent. We weren't Dutch, we were foreign, we weren't sort of a mainstream media company. Amanda Knox is a divisive character. I think he'd seen the film and thought maybe we could deal with divisive characters in an honest way. And then obviously we had this one interview. He said we'll do 30-20 minutes on Monday. We had the meeting Friday, and we're sort of planning this interview where we might have to build an entire movie around a 20-minute interview. I think that was hence the word association. How could we get the most possible information in the shortest possible time? And at the end of the first session, which was sort of 5 minutes shorter than it even should have been, his press secretary comes in, security come in, and they say we've got to go. He stands up and sort of says, "I think we're going to need some more sessions to get to the real detail." So I think all of us in the room were like,
something in him. His vanity. He's very arrogant. I may make that observation, or did you find him that way? How did you find him?
I wouldn't use the word arrogant. I think there's a level of ego to anybody in that situation. Yeah. I think he's similar to a lot of other populists. Yeah. Identity and image is so key to everything that they're trying to do. But actually, like, the question I get the most from anybody is like, what was he like as a person? Did you get on? Was it friendly? And he was honestly like an incredibly charming, charismatic man to work with. Like, when he's not talking about Islam or immigration or the EU, he can be a perfectly decent guy. Unfortunately, he's very rarely not talking about any of those things. But for me as a young filmmaker, it's a very difficult question. Was he nice? Because I owe so much, to him in a way. He gave us, young guys, an opportunity to make a really, I hope, like, game-changing movie, and that no one's ever been able to get this close before and deal with these sensitive issues in this sort of way. And so for me, I feel very grateful to have that opportunity, and he was easy to work with and accommodating. I mean, the stuff like in the park and the bulletproof vest, like his security is saying, "You can't do this, mate," and he's saying, "No, I'm going to do this." So he had something to share. I'm not saying there's nothing in it for him either. He wants the Western audience. As I said at the end, we're looking far beyond Holland in terms of his outlook. But I think he took a massive risk as well.
Yeah, and as a documentary filmmaker, you have to go in and be fair and balanced with your subjects, so I think you a lot of kudos to you, because a lot of people couldn't have done that as well, to be fair to someone that is divisive,
Yeah, I think it was honestly like the bloody hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I think editing, because I edited this as well, I think trying to make 90 minutes and dealing with topics which are incredibly emotional and divisive and subjective in a way which is honest and gives something to both sides. The major risk with a project like this is that you go one way or the other too much. So you go, it's too sympathetic and it's sort of propaganda, or it's too critical and it's sort of mainstream media and untrustworthy. And you see, one of the major points we make in the film, we hope, is that the media massively misrepresents him in a way, and also called the election. You know, they called it the end of populism practically,
Yeah.
because Geert Wilders, and it was all built up in this huge way. The hype was all geared towards that. If he lost, he came second out of 28. Then that was going to be the end of populism. And our point is like that is incredibly misguided.
Yeah, I think that you made a wonderful point about that. And in fact, your other subjects that you, or I hate to call them experts, but on both sides were very, very interesting and helped to really shape and color the film. So how did you go about choosing the people that you would interview, from the journalist to Pamela Geller? And
it wasn't easy because we felt like we had to represent every side. You know, for example, choosing like good Muslim voices. We knew there had to be strong Muslim voices, but most of the people we interviewed, which was probably like 20 for that one role, one or two roles, said exactly what you'd expect them to say. And we didn't want a film where every commentator was saying exactly what you'd expect them to say. So hence, you know, the major Muslim character we have in the film is a white convert who teaches in schools in Holland, and for us, he filed a racial hatred claim against Geert Wilders, and for us that was far more interesting than a lot of the other more traditional Muslim characters. You know, we've had criticism here and there from that at a previous screening. People saying, you know, you didn't represent the Muslim community fairly, and to that I say, well, what is the Muslim community, and how do you define that? And I think, you know, having a white convert is as valid as having any other sort.
And the one, I think he was a journalist, and I might be saying his name incorrectly, Zini?
Zini is actually is in the Green Left Party.
Yeah.
So he's
is he Muslim or?
He's of Muslim heritage, but not necessarily practicing. But he's in the party which is essentially the antithesis to Wilders' party. But they did, in a sense, the best in the election. That they gained something like 12 seats.
Oh, wow.
From being a tiny party, they grew massively and now have a fair size of the seats in Parliament.
Yeah, so interesting. We should open to questions. I'm sure you all have questions out here. Yes?
Well, I know that here in the US there was some criticism towards some people that were humanizing Donald Trump, and I was wondering if you were conscious of kind of humanizing this far-right figure, and if you were worried about that before making the documentary.
That's a good question. It was very present on our minds, obviously. I mean, we were worried. Platforming is the word that gets used a lot. I'm not sure I believe in the idea of platforming. It's kind of intellectually lazy, this idea that you shouldn't talk to certain people because of who they are. That just ends up with incredibly sort of weird society where one side of it is ramped up and the other is not. He is a human, ultimately, you know, and getting to the bottom of the human side of what it's like to live under 24/7 protection for 12 years, it, to me, is more interesting than just a movie where you talk about his political views, because everyone knows his political views. He talks about them all the time on the news. And our access gave us an opportunity to see the human side more than anyone ever has, and that's what I think would be interesting to people. Like, why do you feel this way? Where has this come from? How does it manifest itself? How do you become the second biggest party in Holland when you don't even get to talk to your voters and have no idea? But he would say, well, I mean, look at the numbers, like, I'm doing it. So yes, we're conscious of it, but ultimately I think the risk that we had to take in making this movie was to get out there and show what it's like to be Geert Wilders.
Yeah, and I think in creating a human being, you take him from that demagoguery kind of place, and then you see, you know, really how he could be, how dangerous he can be, just being a human being. So
yeah, I mean, people compare him to Trump, obviously, but I think he's far more dangerous than Trump in some ways. He may be less powerful, but he's much more intelligent, and he knows exactly what he believes. And no one really knows what Trump believes beyond, like, he likes money and women. But Wilders really believes this stuff. Like, there's no joke there. Like, he is incredibly passionate about these issues, and the more he lives in hiding and away from reality, the more he gets entrenched in his own sort of psychology of everything, and he gets more distant, and every time it gets worse and worse, and his views become more strong. And I think, as some of the commentators say, I think that would happen to anybody in that situation.
Did you meet his wife, or was there any opportunity for that?
We tried, but it was like his one major point was like, don't talk to my mum, she's very old. Don't talk to my brother. Don't talk to he asked his wife if she'd be in it, and she said no. I think he keeps her incredibly away from the media and that, just for her own safety, partly. Because she tries to live a bit more of a normal life, I think. And she's everything he has. You know, he cares so much about her because that's all he has left, his kittens and his wife, pretty much.
The kittens.
Yeah.
Yes, and then we'll get to all of you. So we'll get here and then,
Would you like to present this movie in another country?
So the movie's been out in Holland on Vice originally, and then on the national broadcaster a few weeks ago. We had something like 200,000 viewers the first night. So in Holland, it's like a mega. Everyone in Holland is obsessed with Game Builders.
on VPRO or?
Yeah, NPO.
Oh, NPO, yeah, that's great. Wow.
And so it's obviously like a huge topic. There are like big billboards everywhere and stuff. But obviously Holland's, in terms of a commercial sense, Holland's not the biggest country for the movie. I think that hence the branding EuroTrump in the US. In Holland, it's just called Builders.
Okay.
But we are keen to show it elsewhere too.
So if you would like to present it in Arabic country, do you think it's going to be like a little bit difficult?
Honestly, I haven't thought about it. So my role in all of this is pretty much purely creative. And there's a team selling it. We have Andrew Hoa selling it, who sold the highest grossing documentary of all time. So these guys, like the guys selling it, are pretty well schooled in like how to best do it. I'm not really sure, but I know it's sold in Israel already, which is sort of close-ish.
Just to let you know that maybe I think the opinion will be like how can you say like multiplied. Like some people will agree, some other people will not agree with this film, but I think it's gonna be received. Like you know this film?
Well received.
It's gonna be well received. But
Thank you. Yeah,
it's
hopefully.
like a huge opinion, so we're gonna have the other two kind of opinions in Arabic places, Arabic country, I think.
I think there's probably two kinds of opinions on it everywhere as well. I mean, you can't really make a movie like this without pissing a lot of people off, which we've realised along the way, but I think hopefully it's worth it in terms of what we discovered.
But I think the older journalist, as he said, to really have democracy or fairness in the world, you need an informed public. So we do need to see who these people are and make our own decisions. So I think it's a really important film. So yeah, I'll talk to Andrew and tell him where to go. I used to work at Al Jazeera, so yes, sir.
Yeah, so you guys did a great point of explaining how he's still relevant even though he didn't win the election. But as we know, at the end of the day, he did lose. The far left in Holland gained more seats than his party did in that election. And you're British, most of the people in this crowd, I assume, are American. You guys ended up with Brexit, we ended up with Trump. What could we learn from the Dutch that's like exportable, right? So not just like something specific about their culture. What do Dutch people have in their civil society and the rules with which they approach politics that we could learn from them to keep people who are concerned about this rise of far-right ethno-nationalist candidates to fight back? The Dutch could teach us.
That's a really good question. I think the major key is kicking back in the same way that the right kick forward. I think that the right are far more impassioned about turning out, about speaking out, about protesting, about all of these things, and certainly in Europe. I think people are slightly more politically apathetic in certain European countries, particularly the UK probably. I think, I mean, it depends. I think it slightly depends what you mean by lose. The election, I mean, second out of 28, he's by far the most famous politician one of the most famous politicians in Europe, kind of in the world. I don't think he really even wants to be elected. I think he sees his power and his influence extending way beyond just Holland. And actually, I think if he were elected, he'd actually have to do something, and he really doesn't like the idea of that. He'd much rather shout from the sidelines and sort of go at the guys who are in charge and be able to say whatever he wants and tweet. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't claim to be able to say what we could learn specifically and how best to go about it. But I think kicking back in the same way that they kick forward is probably the best way to go.
Yes, and then back here, and then.
Okay. Yeah, I had a question because in the film there's a lot of there are parallels that are drawn between various populist movements, but also there's an emphasis on the fact that the various leaders have their own intentions in mind, and I'm wondering to which extent that is that's the case, because I mean what I found really interesting in this is that it's not like a global movement. It's more like various spheres of influence. And if for example, one of these politicians went against another one of those right-wing politician in another country, technically they could go against one another and still push their own views. So I'm just wondering, at which point are they influencing one another, or and at which point they're actually just reflecting like their own popular. I don't know if that's clear enough, but
So something that was especially interesting for us was that at the beginning of the process of making the movie, Wilders was really happy and interested to talk about Trump. That was like December 2016. So, you know, right in the thick of it. I guess just post the election, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as the process went on, by like March, like his security or his press secretary came in and was like, you can't ask about Trump anymore, he's not going to talk about it anymore. So he started to distance himself as things, I think, started to go slightly wrong in America for Trump, or at least were like sort of less than great. So I think that they're keen to work together in the sense that they like to feed off each other's energy, and the bigger that they all do individually, the more they all get as a whole, and the more they all do as a whole, the more they get individually, you know, in terms of coverage and all sorts of new ideas permeating society. So they're keen on that. I mean, Wilders is massively good friends with Marine Le Pen, and they're always together. And you saw that conference, the idea, like they all come together for these crazy right-wing conferences, like in Koblenz. But I mean, I guess to one extent or another, they're fighting their own battles because they can't help each other beyond that, really, in each other's countries, I'd probably say. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Populism is I feel like slightly higher than anything right now, and about to make a massive bounce back. When we were making this film like 6 months ago, it was like all everyone was talking about, and then they, as I say, they called this election at the end of it. But I think now it's just sitting in the wings, and it'll be back very soon, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, he's actually very conservative, so that's correct?
Kind of. I mean, Holland has a weird spectrum. It's not really, there's a lot of very sort of centre parties, but everything is slightly more loaded towards the right, like than say in the UK or the US. So like Mark Rutte is technically a right-wing party, like slightly right, but in Holland they don't think of that as right-wing in the way that we do. It's just they think of it more in a sort of academic political way. So he's slightly more conservative. Like his big message in a letter that he wrote to the Dutch people just before the election was be normal or get out, and that literally in those words. So Holland has a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues with fringe sort of with immigration and people sort of coming in and living in these sort of sectors around the city, divided by racial groups. It's a much more present issue than I think we find in a lot of places. Say like in the UK that it's to some extent, but not as bad, and certainly in the US I'm not sure it's as bad. But in Holland, that people are very aware of it, and it's a very traditional country, and I think in some senses, unfortunately, a bit more of a racist country.
Yeah, very so, sir, and then we'll get back here. Yes.
Quite frankly, I am very disturbed by watching the documentary, because one of the things that's happening here with Trump is the normalization of Trump, people just getting used to and not being shocked by his behavior. And you normalize him, and he's a smart man, he knows exactly what he's doing when he's on camera. But I wondered if he took you in some way and used you to present himself as, and this is in your editing also, as sort of a normal reaction to the terrible things that are going on in the world. And then you bring in Pam Geller. I mean, Pamela Geller also appears to be reasonable in the footage that you have of her, unless you know the background of who she is, unless you know the background of him. Now in Holland, probably people do, but people here, you know, it's just another television image, another, you know, CNN image. I'm very disturbed by the normalization of him and how you make him reasonable.
Look, I think, as I said, there's always a risk in making a film like this. The biggest travesty, I think, would be to not make a film about this topic and about someone like him. You know, we bring in countless critical voices, some sympathetic voices. There's like the entire history is discussed. Pamela Geller's first line is like, Wilders is the modern day Winston Churchill. I think if people think that that's sane and reasonable, then I don't know what they're on about. As I say, you can't please everyone with a film like this. There's always going to be people who feel strongly one way or the other about how it's portrayed. But we wanted to make a film about psychology and about emotion and about human people, and I think that's what we did. I'm sorry that you don't like it, but
I didn't say I didn't like it. I said I was disturbed by it.
well, it is. I mean, in a way, I hope everyone is disturbed by it because it's disturbing, and he is a disturbing guy. But
I think it is. I think you make a great point, though. It is very disturbing, and the way there's so many points that I don't think Pamela Geller comes off very normal at all, because I find her terrifying. But he makes a couple, especially with the couple of LGBT persons in the march that were actually for him, because they want rights too. I mean, and it's so you kind of think, well, yes, everybody deserves human rights, and so there is a lot of psychological manipulation in what he does. So
yeah,
it's
I think
scary, very scary.
people really like to make these issues black and white, and they like politics is one way or the other. You're left or you're right. I think partly I want to say is like this. There's so much else wrapped up in this.
Yeah. Yes.
What's your next project?
So I'm shooting my second movie at the moment, which Steven's producing. I think it's going to be called Apex Mobile Nightscape. It's about the really famous Instagrammer, YouTuber Nightscape who climbs crazy cranes on the tops of skyscrapers and has built this sort of huge social media empire around doing that. So hopefully that'll be out next summer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we've just moved in together to make it in Shoreditch in London. So.
What's it called again? Apex?
Yeah, Apex Mobile Nightscape. There's some working titles, but he's called Nightscape.
Oh, wow.
And we're working to figure out how best to tell
Very
that story.
different kind of film, so.
Yeah, I know, for sure. I think I need a break from politics.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, sir?
Well, this was a big year for Europe in terms of elections. And I was wondering, did you have a discussion about choosing Geert Wilders or Marine Le Pen or in Austria?
We did, yeah. So, well, the major thing, the reason we came up with this idea in the first place was to do the major next election after Trump. That was the idea. We thought about Marine Le Pen and spoke to her people. The problem with Marine Le Pen is she doesn't like speaking in English. I don't know whether she can or not, but she certainly doesn't. And I felt it was so important to make a film like this, to have someone charismatic talking to camera in English, because in a way we didn't see this as a film for the Dutch audience, we saw this as a film for the global audience. So that conversation did come up. It was really him or her, but he, and also ultimately, they said come and meet us as well, and we went along and went from there.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So the question I want to ask is, I think Paul Graham, who runs Y Combinator, when he analyses elections, people often get caught up in historical reasons and sociological reasons. We touched on it here. He says you can pretty much determine who's going to win by who's the most charismatic. And arguably, it wasn't the case here. But if you took away the blonde hair, if you took away the charisma, do you still think he would have an impact at all? As ridiculous as that sounds, if you take away the look, the image, and the marketing that goes behind it, you see it with Trump, you see it with Milo Yiannopoulos, you see it with Boris, you keep seeing it everywhere. If you take those factors away, would they be anywhere near as effective?
I think if you had him just on paper, I think he's still going to appeal to a large section of the public, because there are a lot of people in Holland who feel very strongly about this and will turn out and say so. It's hard to say, like, if a person was not as they are, would they be the same? But I think an issue in general is that the left, as Tim Stanley touches on, is like a lot more bland in some ways, than the right. The right is in its own way like exciting, and scary, but it makes you feel something. And I think the left really needs to start making people feel things and start having ideas about how you can change things, not just now, like in 3 years, and like in 10, 20, 50 years, because that's what the right is doing. And that appeals to people. I think, that sort of sense of vision of the long term, as scary as it is. So I don't know if that's a really good answer to your question, but okay.
Yes.
Hey, what's up? First of all, congrats, great movie. Congrats to all you guys, it was very entertaining. I have two questions. Quick one first. Did Wilders or his camp or anyone request any changes upon seeing it, or did you even grant them the ability to see it before you released it? Did they have any rights to change anything, and did they exercise them? And second, one of the most interesting parts of the movie for me was when the guy who converted, he was like breaking down, you know, in tears about maybe his little cousin getting deported, whatever, he's crying. Next scene you cut to Gert Wilders talking about his 2 cats, and I was just wondering, like, what was your mindset with that cut in the edit? And just to like fuck with people said, I liked it, it was good.
Yeah.
That was really disturbing.
Yeah.
Going straight to the cats.
Our agreement with Wilders was that they could see it and they could make suggestions. I think sort of showing it to him was one of the most bizarre sort of experiences. And they could make suggestions. He made 7 suggestions. We took none at all.
Did you like the film, or?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think he knew. We told him it was going to be critical. So he wasn't expecting some sort of la-di-da, we love the right, Geert Wilders is the king sort of stuff,
He seems to like
But,
criticism.
Yeah, well, I think he likes any attention to some extent. I don't want to sort of overplay that, because I think the idea that, that I'm a 23-year-old filmmaker making my first one, that if I can give him something that he can't get for himself, that seems a bit wacky. But the kittens thing was like a big... There were lots of fights about the kittens thing in like our internal team. At first I was very anti it, but then I came around to it and we spoke to a lot of different people, and we showed it in a couple of places and we tried it with them without. And I think the point of it was to just create that contrast, that massive contrast between Nuruddin breaking down over something which is so incredibly touching and important in his life. Like that was just incredible honesty that he shows there, and it's clear that he's just being incredibly genuine. And then that with like Wilders just being like, yeah, like whatever, it doesn't really matter, like these are my kittens, they're great. And we just wanted to sort of be a bit shocking, I think, in that sense, and try and create that contrast.
We have time just for one more question, and unfortunately, but we can carry on the conversation downstairs.
In the pub, yeah.
Yes, in the pub. Yes.
How did other Dutch politicians approach him? Because I think a lot of what we saw sort of pre-Trump election was this complacency on behalf of the assumption that Trump was somewhat unelectable. So I'm wondering, like, other than sort of right-wing politicians across Europe, like in Holland, people that do not agree with him, do they treat him as a joke, or do they address his issues as serious and try and combat them?
Yeah, no one treats Geert Wilders like a joke in Holland. He's, as I say, a national obsession for one. He's been around. The other difference between him and Trump, like Geert Wilders has been on the scene politically for years. Like Geert Wilders has been around since like the 90s. And, he's in his 50s now. He started his own party somewhat recently, but he was in politics since he was like 30. And he's been steadily getting larger and larger and more influential, and controlling more and more of the vote. So I don't think it's quite the same as Trump. He's not really an outsider in that sense. He's really part of the political establishment in a way that Trump is not so much.
I have just 2 last little questions. Who pays for his security? Obviously the government.
Yeah.
And
I
what
think
happens if he
technically-
suddenly wasn't elected?
Yeah, we asked him that. Technically, the government will pay for it if he's inside. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think if he goes outside, it's on him. So that's why he's quite sparing with his rallying. It's why something like him doing that park scene with us is such a big deal for them. Like the cost of that, there's like you don't really necessarily see it, but there's like 6 or 7 guys there with huge weapons. There's bikes behind the trees. Like when we were doing this, like 6 in the morning, so there's nobody there. The whole thing is a whole debacle, So I think I get the impression, but don't quote me, but I think that's the way it works.
Yeah. And what's happening? Is it going to be on Vice here in the U.S. or?
Not currently.
Oh, okay. Do you know what's where would people see this next? Here in the U.S.
We don't know yet.
Oh, we don't know.
Well,
okay.
we only, as I say, we started filming in December. It's been like a very, these things usually take longer than this to put out a 90-minute feature. So we've been really focused on like finishing it, and like the sound and colour for this version was like finished like a week or 2 ago.
Oh, is this the first festival or no?
No, we had Sheffield
Holland.
in June, but that was like a very rough, raw version.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then Holland came out on TV, but that was a 60-minute version first, and then the 90, which was slightly different for Holland. And then so Vice did that, but we're here to promote the film in that sense, and hope that there'll be something.
Well, I
in
think
the
it's a
US.
really important film, and congratulations, and I wish you a very successful career in all that you do. And thanks everybody for coming, and keep the conversation going in the pub. And which pub?
Oh God, I know you
Around
tell
the
me.
corner. Around the corner pub. Okay, bye everybody. Thank you. Thank you.